Hello, you're listening to Sending the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkle SEND. As a former teacher and Senko myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. Today's episode is a slightly different format to our usual one. We're turning the tables round because I have a new book out and Twinkle have been very kind. So instead of hosting, I'm scarily in the guest seat today, and my wonderful colleague Michelle is stepping in as our guest host for this special interview to ask me questions, and I am terrified because it's way easier being the host than a guest. Michelle, thank you so much for doing this. Would you like to introduce yourself, and then I will pass on the baton to you and be quiet.
Oh, thank you. I promise to be gentle with you,
Thank
Georgina.
you.
So, hi, I'm Michelle. I'm the National Education Lead for School-Based Early Years. I'm a former assistant head of a primary school, but more importantly than that, I'm someone who cares passionately about inclusive education and what works for families. I'm the parent of a secondary age child with SEND, so this isn't just professional for me, it's personal too. So let's get started. On that note, Georgina, tell us about your book.
Thank you so much, Michelle. The book is Send Strategies for the Secondary Years. Sounds very similar, you might have noticed, to my previous book. So this is my fourth published book. This is the follow-up from Send Strategies for the Primary Years. It's the one I actually wanted to write first, Michelle, but Bloomsbury very wisely said you start with primary, Georgina, then you do the secondary book secondary, because it makes more logical sense. But I did actually want to write this one first because I'm a secondary teacher at heart. But yeah, I think it's got a focus on the secondary phase, obviously, and it's such a crucial and often overlooked stage in education for young
Yeah.
children with SEND. And the idea behind it, similar to the primary book, is to provide information about SEND, the needs, how you might notice a young person with various different needs, difficulties they might have, how you're going to support them, strategies you can do in the lesson if you're a teacher, strategies you can do across the whole school if you're in leadership or if you're the Senko, or you can speak to the leadership team and ask them to do it. And then importantly as well, it's just as much for parents. So there's lots of strategies that you can use at home to support them and out and about at home as well, because I know that unlike primary age children that you've got more control over because they're at home in your house a lot of the time and you're taking them to places, secondary school kids, they're not, are they? So it's realistic to that. And I think it comes at a time, as we know at the moment, of needing a SEND system to work and
Mm.
support children with SEND, but realistically, as much as I want to change the system, this book can't do that, but it can support people right now whilst they're sort of waiting for a system to work for them. So there's loads of practical strategies that you can read in the book and then put into place the next day when you're in the classroom or if you're at home with your young person, just to support them as best you can. And I'm so grateful. There's been some amazing contributors to the book, like young people, families, like Senkos have chatted to me, teachers have chatted to me. So many people have spoken to me and contributed towards it. And, those voices are really at the heart of it. And yeah, it's just, I didn't want people to wait. I know, like, we're all waiting on this Send white paper. You never know when this episode comes out. It may well, the white paper might be out and the Send reforms might be in full view now. But regardless, we can't wait. Children can't wait. Young people
Yeah.
can't wait. And they've been waiting for assessments, for diagnosis, for
Yeah.
EHCPs. And there's things we can do right now to support them. And that's kind of what I wanted people to get from the book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a parent of a child with SEND, there does seem to be a lot of information for the early years and for when your child's at primary. And then when they get to secondary, it's like you say, they go off to a mystery place behind the doors of the school. There's sometimes very little information, and it
Mm.
is hard to find information out there. So
Yeah.
I really welcome this book. I'm very, very excited, very excited.
Thanks, Michelle.
So you open the book with the words postcode lottery, broken, crisis, under-resourced, and inequitable. Tell us about that start to the book and what made you feel that now was the moment to write a book focused on the secondary years.
Yeah, so those words I think sort of reflect the reality of the SEND system at the moment.
Mm.
They were ones that I picked out from headlines in the national press because it's in the national press a lot at the moment. They were sort of the keywords that were coming up there. There were also the words that families are using on social media and in
Yeah.
chats and teachers are using and the words in the headline. And I think even the education secretary, didn't she? She described the system as neglected to the point of crisis at the
Yeah.
moment. So it's just to illustrate that picture, but also because I didn't want the whole book to be about the problem. I wanted to do a short bit in the introduction. This is the problem. I get it. I get it's
Yeah.
really rubbish at the moment. But then, realistically, people haven't picked up the book to hear me moan about the sentence system. They can work with me and hear me do that. As Michelle hears me talk about quite a lot. But they haven't picked the book up for that. That's a pointless book. Like it doesn't help anybody by me
Mm.
just complaining over pages and pages about what the sentence system looks like. Um, Instead, I wanted it to be practical. So I wanted to get that bit at the beginning and then go
Mm.
on to some of the statistics around waiting time, some of the statistics about what's actually happening. But then, yeah, people have picked it up for solutions. They actually want some strategies from it. They don't need someone telling them what they already know. So yeah, it also felt like the right moment. Because we're waiting, aren't we? And I
Yeah.
just feel it just makes me feel so cross that people are waiting. I think when I wrote the primary book, I was naively hoping that it would get published and then it wouldn't be needed because something would have happened systemically and everything would be
Mm.
solved and it wasn't. And then I remember thinking, right, well, I do need to write the secondary book after all because it's still not
Yeah.
sorted.
Yeah.
And then I did think the same. I wondered by the time this book came out if things might have got better. Maybe I'm just too optimistic, Michelle. But yeah, this book is what you can do, even on the backdrop of things not working, even with the chaos and noise from the press,
Mm.
what you can actually do and what you have control over. Because I think parents and teachers feel of children with SEND and those children of SEND themselves haven't had a lot of control recently.
Yeah, definitely. And we can sometimes feel like we're alone in our
Yeah.
struggles with the system as either an educator or a parent. So having those practical strategies is really, really welcomed. So you're really clear that this book isn't about waiting for system level reform, but it's about what we can do right now. In your opinion, what mindset shift do you hope teachers and parents take from the book?
Yeah, and I think even when the reforms happen and we find out there's still going to be a period of
Mm.
like of us waiting for things to be put in place, and if they're not the right things, what we do then. So I wouldn't I think parents and teachers feel a little bit helpless about SEND and supporting young people. So I wanted them to feel empowered. Is yeah, yes, things are struggling, the system's struggling, but it doesn't mean we can't make a meaningful difference. And there are so
Yeah.
many, like when researching this book, there's so many amazing parents. We know parents are brilliant. And there's so many amazing teachers and Senkos and people making like small adjustments in the classroom that make such a
Yeah.
difference to the young people in that school or the young people at home. And that's yeah, they're doing it already. And I just kind of wanted to help empower them and realize what you're doing is a good thing. And here's some more ideas of what more you could be doing to support. And there's lots of mixed messaging, there's lots of uncertainty and lack of
Mm.
confidence in doing the right thing. I think I've spoken to teachers who are nervous, like they might have a child who they think is autistic or they know is autistic, or a
Mm.
child who's got difficulties concentrating, but they don't know what diagnosis it is, and it doesn't matter if they knew or not. But they don't know
Mm.
what to do because they don't want to do
Yeah.
the wrong thing. So we don't
Mm.
do anything. And I think that's kind of the hurdle I wanted to get across, like shifting from I can't do anything until I've got a diagnosis or until I understand more about this to I know they're struggling with this area of need. I know they can't concentrate
Yeah.
on my lessons, or I know at home they're struggling to concentrate on revision, but I can do this to support them right now,
Mm.
regardless. And I think that mindset shift is really
Yeah.
powerful. It's something that anyone can adopt. It's just thinking, right, this is what I've got in front of me, and this is what I can do to help right now.
Yeah. Really empowering as well, which is
Absolutely.
exactly what we need. Really empowering. You've structured the book around area of need rather than diagnosis, and you've just mentioned that a little bit
Yeah.
briefly. Why was this approach so important, especially when thinking of secondary settings?
Yeah, I think because we don't teach diagnosis, do we? We teach children.
We do.
At the end of the day. And I think when I wrote SEND strategies for the primary years, I remember having a conversation with somebody who I really respect in the SEND field. And she gave me some great advice. And she said, don't do it on diagnosis because there's so many children that haven't got a diagnosis yet or are
Yeah.
waiting. But also just you've also got the danger of people using it to sort of diagnose children themselves in a weird in a
Yeah.
different way or sort of
Mm.
preempt what they think. And so
Yeah.
I didn't want that to be the focus of the book. Instead, I just wanted it to be these are some of the needs, and this is how you can support with those various needs. It doesn't matter if they've got a diagnosis or that they haven't. We don't know what's going to happen with EHCPs. We don't know what's going to happen with waiting times for diagnosis. None of those things are in our control, but
No.
we can see what the areas of needs are, and
Yeah.
we know what strategies work well for that. So it's sharing that. And I think in secondary school, it's really common for pupils to have unmet needs or unidentified
Mm.
needs. And some might be masking, some might have been waiting for assessments for such a long time, some might never receive a formal diagnosis at all, even though, lots of people end up after school getting a diagnosis for
Yeah.
various different things. And I think by focusing on the areas of need, so things like emotional regulation or literacy or sensory
Mm.
processing or communication or concentration, all of those different things, you can support every young person who's struggling, not just a few. And I think that's where we're struggling a little bit in schools, regardless of whether or not they've got a
Mm.
diagnosis. And it helps teachers, or hope to help teachers, feel more confident because they're
Yeah.
responding to what they see, not what they're waiting to be told they're going to
Yes.
see.
Yeah. The word waiting is used a lot when thinking about children with SEND, especially in secondary schools.
Yeah.
So actually thinking about what we can do, we don't have to always
Yeah.
wait for the next thing or to be told. It's really refreshing to think actually these are practical things that we can put in place.
Yeah, because they've waited too long, haven't they? If they've got to
Yeah.
secondary school and we haven't
Yes.
identified their needs, for goodness sake, like they can't wait
Yes.
any longer.
No.
And I think from the research as well into the book, and I know I mentioned this before we jumped on the on this interview, Michelle, like the research behind it, it's horrible some of the stuff I was finding out.
Mm.
It's when when primary school children, some of the effects of like not identifying need early for primary school kids is awful. Like, it's
Mm.
things, and it might be like if they're not identified having speech and language difficulties and we're not
Yeah.
supporting them, they might struggle in the playground to make friends and they might struggle to access the learning, which, as a primary school child
Mm.
is very, very important that, and we need to support them. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that's not a big thing. But when they get to secondary school, the impacts and the things that I was
Mm.
reading, when we're not supporting them properly and they've got unmet needs, it's things like criminality they could end up in.
Yeah.
It affects their employment, it affects all of these big massive life
Mm.
things, and it's terrifying if we get it wrong for these children what the impact can be.
Mm. Terrifying, the thought of waiting to
Yeah.
put something in place for these children.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about the transition to secondary
Yeah.
school, we know that secondary school brings new pressures, academic, social, and emotional. What makes the secondary school years uniquely challenging for people with SEND?
Yeah, I think there's so many things, isn't there? I think, like you were saying about from parental side, when they go to school, it's this unknown place
Yeah.
to you. It's that independence that they've
Mm.
suddenly got to have. They're very nurtured in primary school, and don't get me wrong, they're very nurtured as well. I'm a secondary school teacher at heart, so we do look after them very well. But it is very different. They haven't got that
Mm.
one teacher that they're with all the time. They're moving from lesson to lesson.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different things. There's also a lot more sensory. The environment sensory wise isn't great in a
The
secondary school.
school
The school
bell.
bell. I've written
Ah.
about the school bell in the book,
Oh,
Michelle. And there are
gosh.
some, but this is what I'm saying. There are things you can do. The school bell is a nightmare for so many children.
Mm.
And there are so many things you can do about school bell. So some schools I was talking to have just got rid of it. They've just gone, no, we're not having the school
Let's
bell
do
anymore.
it. Why?
You
Why
don't
is it
actually,
still
turns out
there?
you can manage without it. I know, shock
We
horror.
get through the rest of our life without a bell. It's like,
I know.
yeah, we can do it.
Exactly. So yeah, turns out we can manage without a bell. But also some schools were doing really cool stuff. So they had a student voice. They spoke about the bell. They didn't, lots of kids turned out loads of children or loads of young people didn't like the bell. So they recorded children speaking instead saying, it's time for your next lesson. And like, or put some were doing some music, some like, and they chose
Oh,
the correct music, some really nice calming music that would happen instead.
oh, that's
And it's like some
lovely.
really cool stuff that schools are doing that's slightly different, but it won't upset Ofsted. We don't
No.
need to worry. It's just slightly different and way more
Yeah.
inclusive. And it's thinking about children's needs first, which is so important. But yeah, I think the demands academically suddenly increase, don't they, when you go into secondary
Mm.
school? The language becomes more complex, not just, and this was really interesting research, it's not just the language in the lessons, because, science is like a whole different language when you're in secondary school, but
Yeah.
loads of new words. But it's like every subject has its subject specific
Mm.
vocabulary, but then they're also getting in the playground really complex language because you've got all this sort of, and I'm going to sound like I'm really old, but like slang and street talk and all of that sort of stuff, like
Great
different
talk.
words. Um,
Yeah.
and then remembering as well, which can be really difficult for some
Yeah.
young people, remembering when to use certain tone of voice and certain language
Mm.
with one person, but it wouldn't be appropriate to use that those
Mm.
same words with a head teacher.
Yeah.
But if you then spoke just in the same way to teachers as you did to your friends wouldn't hang out with you as much because of the
Yeah.
social nuances around you sounding
Yeah.
too grown up and
We're exposed to so many more people, aren't we, at secondary
yeah.
than we have been at primary?
It's so complicated. Like socially, it's complicated. The pace is
Mm.
faster. Expectations around independence, suddenly grow. The social world becomes really complicated. I think
Yeah.
not just for girls, but especially for girls. I think it's incredible. I remember it well. It's very
Oh.
complicated at high school as a girl. And the stakes are higher, if you get things wrong, and like I was saying, if you get things wrong, if we don't meet these needs now, it doesn't just affect friendships and test scores. You're influencing long-term outcomes
Mm.
here. Like we've got to get it right for children we've got to get it right for children full stop. But in secondary school, we
Mm.
can't not get it right because, it affects their confidence, their mental health, their employment opportunities, their
Mm.
vulnerability to exploitation or criminality. Yeah, timely support is so, so important at secondary school. And I think one thing that annoys me, there's a lot of focus at the moment on early identification and support, which
Mm.
I fully support. I think it's great, but we mustn't forget secondary school children in this sort of in this focus because timely support is timely and it can be timely for secondary school. It doesn't just mean early years.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've touched upon there the importance of timely identification and support. Why do you think so many needs go unnoticed until secondary school?
Yeah, I think the speech and language chapter, so the first chapter's on speech and language, and that one was really interesting, was lots of children can manage until they get to secondary school, then that sort of language or literacy as well sort of
Mm.
jumps significantly in secondary, like we were saying with all the different subject specific vocabulary. And so those sort of difficulties you might have got away with in primary school a little bit more. You
Yeah.
can't quite keep up potentially with the literacy demands and with the language demands, and
Mm.
that it suddenly becomes more apparent. But secondary's by the time they get to secondary, this is another thing that's really hard to unpick, is by the time they get to secondary, they will have, if they've not been identified with a certain need by the time they've got to
Mm.
secondary, then they've got incredibly effective coping strategies and skills and workarounds
Yeah.
and ways to hide it essentially from us, especially if they're masking it. And that these, they're not doing it on purpose. Often
Mm.
it's completely subconscious, but they might appear to be managing and it's really hard to notice them when actually they're working like twice as hard with
Yeah.
these workarounds and strategies and ways
Mm.
to hide
Must
it.
be exhausting.
Absolutely. And
Mm.
then there's the whole like social bit of you suddenly don't want to be the child that needs extra help. Maybe at primary school you were okay with that, but
Yeah.
now you really don't want to look different to anybody else and you want to just look like you're understanding it or the
Mm.
opposite and you think it's easier to mess around in the class because then
Yeah.
I prefer to, wouldn't you? Like I would prefer to
Yeah.
be the funny kid in the class than for people to know that I was struggling. See,
Mm.
yeah, there's so much. That's why there's a whole book, Michelle.
So much. We need a whole book on this.
We
Yeah,
do. That's what I
definitely.
thought. But also, I think, they get it's they don't just they get unnoticed at secondary school as well because secondary teachers, it's no fault of their own. They've got
Mm.
hundreds of pupils a week to see. I
Yes.
remember parents' evenings in the first term, and you'd be like, some of these classes you've taught once a week, and you've got to remember every single person's name, let alone their needs and identify
Yeah.
their needs. I think that's really hard, and I think something probably
Mm.
policy level needs to happen to support us in, I don't know, key people to
Mm.
build those relationships up. But it's going to be so hard for them to spot these subtle patterns that if you're only seeing them for like
Yeah.
a week, once a week, how you
As a
can.
primary school teacher, I can't even imagine that because I'd feel like I always knew my 30 children really, really well because I was with them for longer periods of time than I was my own children a lot of the time.
Yeah,
But seeing like several hundreds of children a
exactly.
week, it must just be, it's impossible to remember everyone's needs,
Exactly.
surely.
And let alone then know their needs and know how to support them or realize
Yeah,
that they have needs that nobody else has noticed. There's so much. It's really hard, but you can do it.
you
That's what the
can.
book will
Yeah,
help
read
with.
the book. So we've talked about the bell, the school bell,
Yes.
and your book is full of practical no wait strategies that can be
Yeah.
used immediately, which is fantastic. What are a few that secondary teachers often overlook but can make a big difference?
Yeah. I think the first one, and the one that sticks out and one I'm quite passionate about is like the sensory audits. The bell
Yeah.
falls into that. But just looking at you, and I look back and when I'm saying this, I can see my classrooms that I've done myself, and I'm thinking, gosh, I wish I'd have known to do that. So I get it. But like
Yeah.
looking at your classroom with different eyes and thinking, is it too noisy? Have I got like
Mm,
is there anything I can do to make my classroom better for children who've got sensory differences? Because people don't experience the world in the same way everybody else does. And it's so important to make sure we're thinking about
mm,
sensory. But yeah, there's so many things you can do, like, and there's a whole book, so it's really tricky to pull them out, but reducing the amount of spoken information given at once, overwhelming people,
mm.
visual supports, massive fan of visuals, put them everywhere. I think we use them a lot in primary schools, but
Yeah.
in secondary, we're not using them. Well, some do, but not as much consistently
Mm.
across the school. Breaking tasks into smaller steps, giving more processing time. Somebody told me you're supposed to ask a question, then wait, is it 10 seconds, Michelle, for someone to answer it?
But
Can
we
you
can feel
imagine?
like that's an awkward silence, can't we? So
I
we want to
couldn't.
fill that.
Yeah, even then I was feeling that.
Yeah.
I couldn't manage to do that as a teacher, but apparently it's the way forward. And then it enables everybody to have that processing time. So I think thinking about how long if you're actually giving people long enough to answer a question,
Mm.
checking, like understanding in different ways rather than, privately perhaps rather than publicly,
Yeah.
offering movement breaks. And I don't mean, not in the same way as in primary school. I'm not under no illusion that you're going to set up some corner and they're going, no offense, primary colleagues, but you're going to set up some corner and they're going to do some star jumps. Because probably don't want to do that.
I
But
don't think so.
some might. I can think of some kids that might have enjoyed doing that. But movement breaks can be like helpful movement breaks. They can be handing the books out. They can be, lifting something for you. They can be little bits and bobs that get them
Yeah.
out of their seat just to help them focus. I remember somebody saying to me they had a child in the class who wasn't concentrating very well and just wants to be out of their seat all the time. They said, Georgina, how can I get them to stay in their seat? And I was like, why don't you let them get out of their seat? They were like, what? And I was like, why don't you give them the books to hand out? Why don't they be your helper? Do all of that and see if then
Mm.
they focus more on the thing. And I think, it wasn't their fault, but sometimes it's easier, isn't it, when you're not in that
Yeah.
situation, when you're looking
Of
from afar, you're like,
course.
oh,
Yeah.
have you tried that? And they're like, yeah, that worked.
Yeah. If you've always done it that way, of course, yeah, and you were trained that way. But yeah, let's actually let the child out of their seat.
Shock horror. Um,
Ah.
and then I suppose like there's a whole chapter on organization, which I think is really helpful,
Mm.
and like concentration and organization, which is really helpful for revision techniques and all of that side of stuff that
Wow.
we have to think about. But you know, we're helping kids who then become adults with like a toolkit of strategies. These
Mm.
strategies aren't just strategies they're going to use in the secondary years. They're going to be things they
Yeah.
use for the rest of their lives and they can use them and work out which ones work for them. It
Mm.
might be, routines and checklists. I have a checklist on my desk right now that I use to help me know when to do things like this.
Yeah, me too.
Tick them off, make me feel great when I tick them off. But
Yeah.
giving kids these things to do and saying this,
Yeah.
so they can start doing them now and help them get organized and help them have that sort of autonomy and control. I don't know. Yeah, there's loads of ideas. Buy the book.
Sounds so exciting. How can teachers balance the demands of a busy secondary timetable, which we've touched upon, with the need to personalize support for young people with SEND?
Yeah. And I think that was like the biggest thing in my head when I was writing this book because it's
Yeah.
hard. Like we said, there's so many kids there, and you're thinking, how do you do it?
Mm.
And you could just look at it and think that's impossible. We can't possibly do it.
Yeah.
And but I'm not asking you to do 30 different lesson plans. That would be ridiculous.
Mm.
We're trying to just make a lot of the things we can put in place benefit everybody. They're a
Yeah.
change for everybody that you support these children first, and it means everybody, it's
Yeah.
more accessible for everyone. So universal strategies, I suppose, that can make an impact for everybody. And personalization as well doesn't have to be something massive. I'm not
Mm.
suggesting huge, big changes that you're going to have to do in every single lesson or huge, big changes that you're going to have to do at home. But, in class, it could be just thinking about the seating choice just a little bit more, just for one
Yeah.
more minute when you're thinking, oh,
Mm.
actually, loads of people walk past that area and I might not sit so and so in that thoroughfare because they've got sensory
Yeah.
processing difficulties.
Mm.
So and so gets knocked into a few times and they feel dysregulated. That's
Yeah.
all I'm saying. It's not a massive change.
No.
Might be just you remember to do a quiet check-in with so and so on the front row once in a while. It
Mm.
might be that you just change and have a predictable routine. So you just have a routine chart on the wall
Mm.
that helps everybody with that. And there'll be children or young people that when you're doing these strategies, you'll probably never know that it helped them, and you'll never know
Yeah.
that they had any extra needs. And by putting these
Mm.
universal strategies in, you're helping way more than just children you're probably intending to help.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And that leads on to my next question. So you emphasize that strategies are grounded in a neuro-affirming approach, which are central to this book. What does that actually look like in practice for teachers and for parents?
Yeah, I think this is so important. And I think it's
Mm,
recognizing that neurodivergent young people, they're not broken, they're not wrong,
no.
there's not nothing to be fixed. They're just experiencing the world slightly differently.
Hmm.
And we need to adapt to them more than they need to adapt to us. We're not trying to get them to fit into our way
Yeah.
of socializing, our way of acting. All of it doesn't need to be like that. So things like we're adapting the environment rather than expecting them to change for our environment. So
Yeah.
yeah, like the school bell example, for example. We're valuing different communication styles. Not everybody likes to communicate in the same way or is able to communicate in the same way.
Mm,
So we're enabling different ways to express your ideas. Avoiding language that implies deficit, I think is really important. Celebrating strengths, but yeah, just giving, and you've got to remember young people and then becoming adults, we need to give them sort of autonomy and choice and
mm,
support them with that and listening to their lived experience and what's actually going on and properly listening and understanding and taking it into account. We're
mm.
creating conditions where they can thrive. And we're not trying to get them to fit into our mold. And I think that's
Yeah.
really, really important.
Yeah, we want them to thrive, not just survive. I've heard that so many
Exactly.
times, but it's so true, so
It
powerful.
is. The podcast I did before this, I spoke to Dan Tresman, he's a special school head, and he was saying and we were chatting about needs being met. And we were like, isn't it awful that we talk about needs being met as if that's the bit, that's what we're aiming for? We're
Yeah,
not, is it? We're aiming for the children to absolutely thrive, surely, not just, oh yes, their needs are met.
yeah.
That's not
Tick, we've
enough.
done our job.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can you imagine as a parent though, knowing your child just their needs are being met? Like, I'm sorry,
yeah.
that's not good enough, is it?
No,
And
they're
as a
warm.
teacher,
Yeah,
it's not
at
good
home,
enough.
if their needs were met, yeah, they're warm. They've got a roof over the head, basic food.
Sorted.
We want more. We want
Yeah, and
more than that.
teachers want more than that. And I think, yeah, I think we just, yeah, absolutely.
So this book includes case studies from young people and adults reflecting on their secondary experiences. What did you learn from these stories?
So, so much. It's probably the best bit of the book is the bit I haven't
Oh.
written, Michelle. So like in the primary one, each chapter has at least one of the chapters has two case studies because I just thought both of them were brilliant. But they're at the beginning, before I even start writing, there's a case study from
Oh,
either a teenager who's in schools at the moment or an adult who's reflecting on their sort of
yeah.
teenage years in secondary school. And I'm so grateful for their time and sharing it and being so open and honest. And
Mm,
I think the biggest theme is just this importance of identifying them early enough and giving them
yeah.
support. And so many of them said they wish they'd had their needs supported earlier and
Oh,
recognized earlier. That just came up again and again and again.
mm,
And another theme was just how important just one adult who can make a massive
yeah.
difference to them. There's always one. And I think we all probably have that when you think back to school. There's one teacher
Hmm.
in your head, isn't there, that made that
Yeah.
difference. And how amazing, like teachers listening, how amazing if that's you. Do you know what I mean?
Mm,
You will be making a massive difference to learners with SEND in your school. And that adult who believes them, who listens to them, who understands things, who makes those adaptations and makes it
mm,
easier for them in the lesson, and those small acts of understanding that can stay with
yeah.
people for their entire lives. Like I'm not overestimating the impact
No, no,
that
not at all.
those little tweaks, yeah. And I just think it made me realize how powerful it is when young people are. Oh, you are making me emotional, Michelle. When young
Do you
people
know
feel
what? I'm
understood.
starting to tear up a little bit as well. There's somebody I'm thinking of in my head
That's what it
at
is,
my
isn't it?
daughter's school. Yeah, and I'm thinking, yeah, that person absolutely does this. Yeah.
Yeah, and it does make you feel emotional. Like it's just how powerful it is for a child just to be
Mm,
understood. And
mm.
also how damaging it is if they don't have that person at school or anybody that understands.
Oh
Oh
God,
God, I'm going to be
you just
emotional.
set me off
Oh
now.
God, no, genuinely, but it makes me feel so cross. The thought of some, yeah,
Mm,
and this, yeah, but yeah, so many of them talked about feeling like invisible or misunderstood or being mislabeled of being
mm,
difficult or lazy or all of these horrible things when they
yeah.
were just struggling and they just needed some extra support. And then they
Mm,
shared stories of teachers who made them feel safe, who made them feel
yeah.
valued and capable, and that they could do anything. And that stays with people like for their
Yeah.
entire lives. And I think teachers don't underestimate the impact you can have because even just doing some small little tweaks can make
Yeah.
such a difference to people's lives.
Mm, yeah. Oh
She's not
gosh.
crying yet.
I'm gonna move on before the tears start. So, despite the challenges, what gives you hope about the future of SEND support? And what message would you like to leave those who feel overwhelmed but want to make a difference?
Yeah, I think what gives me hope is, and again, oh God, this is emotional, Michelle. What gives me hope is hearing from teachers and parents and carers and
Yeah.
therapists and young people themselves, but like the passion and the commitment for
Mm,
supporting children with SEND. There's so much of it around, Michelle. We talk about all the awful stuff
mm,
at the moment, but there are so many teachers and so
yeah.
many parents going absolutely above and beyond for
Yeah.
children at the moment, who really, really care. And I think my message would be that you don't have to fix everything. We're not,
Mm,
you can't do that. That's not possible. But just start somewhere with one small tweak, with one little
yeah.
change, one moment of understanding, one little conversation, and that can have such a big impact. And you won't even know the impact. We might see some of the impact, but you won't know
Yeah.
how big an impact that's going to have on a child's life. But they literally would, if you make that impact, then it can impact them on the rest of their lives and can change sort of the trajectory of their lives. It's such an important stage. Whew.
Georgina, thank you so, so much.
Thank
I've
you.
pre-ordered my copy. I am so
Thank
excited. I've
you.
also pre-ordered copies for the rest of the family as
Have
well.
you
Yes,
actually?
I actually have.
Oh,
Yeah,
Michelle,
yeah.
thank you
I'm
so
so
much.
excited. And I've really enjoyed chatting with you
Oh,
today. Thank
thank you.
you.
And the book is out March the 12th, from all available bookshops. Thank you very much.